And thank you so much for coming. I really feel honored, and I'm ready to work with you. So I need to, can you hear me fine if I come away from that or not? No? Okay. Okay, I'm used to kind of walking and moving, and so I'll try to do this.
I can either give you a collar mic or I can give you a hand mic. Your call.
I could do a collar. That gives me my hands to be outrageous with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait a minute. This cable.
You want? So do this and then take
Yes.
this down, right?
Yes.
So you want this to go?
Yeah. This you'll have to keep somewhere.
I know.
Yeah.
Like this, right? Yeah.
Just plug it up.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah?
Can we get this removed or you want this here?
No, that's good.
Right.
Well, so as I was saying, all right, I need you to work with me. If I say something and you don't know what I'm talking about, or I use a word and it doesn't really resonate with you, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be using it. It just means I need you to think with me. So the point here is that I do have a way of thinking that I'm really committed to, and that's politically, meaning that I try to understand the context out of anything I talk about. So if I'm going to talk about rape culture or sexual violence, I want a context for understanding that that's not a thing. It's not a single thing. It is part of a structure of power, and that the structure of power needs to be changed in order for sexual violence to be stopped, for rape to end. And of course, in my most imaginative moments, it's for a socially just world where nobody's hungry and nobody's raped. Okay, so for those of you who say, dream on, Zillah, I will. All right? And for those of you who are willing to kind of think about, maybe there's actually something we might be able to do to have this happen, well, that's just a little bit of what I'm going to ask you to think with me about, okay? So when I was asked for a title, I think the initial title I sent was Thinking with and Against Capitalist Racialized Patriarchy. And then I was told I needed a little bit shorter thing. You'll probably feel that way tonight before we're done, okay? So I shortened it to just Capitalist Racialized Patriarchy, which is a mouthful, you know, and for those of you who think, don't have a clue, Zillah, well, I'm going to give you just a few hints at what that might mean. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the world as we know it at the moment, waiting to see if Donald Trump is going to become our next president. Now I know maybe there are some Modi fans here. Forget it. Okay, there's room for you, but I know that Donald has spoken on behalf of feeling close to Hindus. And for all the Hindus I love, I think, shut up, Trump. Don't you dirty them with your racism, your misogyny, and your anger at a world that is changing way too fast for you, and you're just telling all of us to slow down with you. Okay? So, but I want to just say a word about how I think. And how I think is theoretically. And for those of you who think that that means that's intellectual or academic, no. Theoretical thinking is the way to survive and not be completely made hopeless and to be able to remain defiant. So when I say theoretical thinking, I mean just connecting oppressive points that we live within, instead of allowing them to be isolated as though one oppression or one indignity is not connected to so many others. If we can connect those indignities, we can build coalitions that can change the world. But without coalitions, I know we can't. And right now in the US, we're just hysterically building coalitions to make sure that Donald Trump does not get elected. Now, I do wish I could say that as a feminist, and I am a feminist, but I am deeply an anti-racist, anti-imperialist, anti-militarist feminist. You can't disconnect those for me. They go together, just like capitalist, racialized patriarchy as the thing that we are trying to change. Okay? So the argument here is that as I just throw out, and I'm going to just throw out ideas, I'm not going to connect all of them, because actually either you'll make a connection or you won't. But the work, I can't do that work. You'll do the work of either saying, yes, those things do come together as a system of power and oppression, or they don't. And then we could really work with that in our discussion after I present some of the points. So let me just say a few words about capitalist racialized patriarchy, okay? So my argument here is the problem is not capitalism. You can't hear? Okay. Okay, I'm here. I will stay here. You win. All right. So one for you so far. All right, so the point here is that capitalism to me is an economic system, but it's never existed as we have lived it without its racist history, without its imperialist history, without its colonial history. So to use a term, capitalism, and say capitalism is the problem, traditional Marxists do that all the time. They say that that is the problem. For me, I was brought up in a communist household. Therefore, Marxism was just an integral part of the way that I thought as a child. It was totally normal, totally natural to think that people should be treated with dignity. Particularly in the United States, black people at that time, when I was a child, the 40s, the 50s, and we had a civil rights movement working so hard towards that. But the idea of capitalism, the way that most Marxists think about it, you can say, if we get rid of capitalism, we can have socialism, we can have liberation. My point is, the reason we never seem to be able to have a revolution that works is because capitalism isn't the only problem. It is the complicated problem of the way that capitalism and racism and the system of patriarchy and their ideologies of racism and of misogyny, which is basically the hatred of women, that those systems go together to build a system of exploitation that is particular and universal, or what I would call polyversal, always. So again, part of the problem of thinking politically is often we are not given a language that helps us. So capitalism is said to be the issue. Just like the Pope, he says poverty is horrible and we must end poverty. And if we end poverty, we will have a humane globe. And as a feminist, I say to the Pope, what about the fact that one of the leading reasons for poverty for women is the lack of their control of their bodies, the right to abort if they need to? How is it that you talk about poverty and condone a system of patriarchy. In other words, a system that actually takes the control from women of their own bodies. So the point here is that not only does the Pope say that, but then progressives across the globe hail him as what? As a true believer in humanity. And I am saying, if you see capitalist racialized patriarchy as the problem, you need a more complicated notion of how you're going to deal with the issue of poverty. If you don't deal with the issue of the control of one's sexual reproductive body, if you don't end sexual violence towards women, there cannot be a globe that can be called democratic. So the idea here of theorizing capitalized, racialized patriarchy is just saying that you see it, you name it, and you try to think about how it defines a complex intersectional system. Now, the term intersectional means to say that power is always overlapping. So systems of power overlap with each other and protect parts of each other at the point where the overlap occurs. That overlapping is often today called intersectional, that it is not singular, that the problem that we face of oppression and power is what? That it is multiple, that it is complex, and that we need language that recognizes that case. Okay? So sexual violence, for me, I just want to take it as one site to say that so often when people speak about the problem of sexual violence, it is seen as though it locates itself with the female body, most often in terms of sexual harassment or the issue, the practice, the problem, the horror of sexual rape. I want to argue that sexual violence undergirds every piece of the intersectional lives that we live. So when we are on the job, sexual violence is present. When we are in the home doing domestic labor, sexual violence is often present. When we are doing the labors of consumerism, sexual violence is present. So if we use that as a connecting site and not a singular site, that we can build coalitions across all kinds of divides, black and white, Dalit and Hindu, men and women, transgender and cisgender. The point here that the way that we see one another comes to recognize the need for coalition. Okay, so I thought I would then just dip away from this theoretical foundation, just meaning the way that I'm asking you to think, and to think complexly and not singularly, okay? And read you the note that I wrote. I had a whole bunch of people that I work with across the United States and across the globe knew I was coming to Hyderabad. A lot of people had been asking me, what are you going to do? What are you going to say about our election? How can you go anywhere at this moment? So, and I was really pretty busy. So I just wrote a note and put it on Facebook. And it was for all of my thousands of friends. Okay? So it says, leaving for Hyderabad tomorrow to meet and talk with feminists about Marxist feminisms, in the plural, rape culture, the global refugee crisis, and this election. My head and my heart is chaotic. As I have finished up my preps thinking about the disassembling of the neoliberal, patriarchal, racist state and its open secrets. Okay, so are you all thinking, okay, so Zillah, what's that? An open secret. I think we are actually, that's the disassembling of the US state at the moment, where nothing seems to happen and everything seems to happen. All right, that it is because the purpose of politics is to always protect its power structure. That means to mystify itself, to not really let us know what is happening. Okay? In other words, politics is made of secrets, and the better you can keep them, the more total the power system can remain. Secrets have become open. I think they've become more open throughout the globe, but definitely in the US. The secret of sexual violence is definitely more open. It doesn't mean that we are really dealing with it yet, but it's definitely more open than it was 20, 30 years ago. So, again, my point here is that politics is disassembling, and what do I call it? As I said to you, the patriarchal, racist state, and I call it neoliberal, which is basically the latest formulation of the capitalist system that we live in. Neoliberal really says equality is no longer possible. We believe in opportunity rather than equality. And it's called neoliberal because it pretends to be democratic, using a set of ideas that are completely privatized, where there is no commitment to the public, whether it's public health, public happiness, or public justice. So the idea here is I'm coming to Hyderabad feeling like the secrets have become open, thinking that Trump has violated everything, including the privacy rules of sexual assault. In other words, if you do sexual assault, you definitely don't what? Tell. So here he told the world, not to mention most of us, that he practices sexual assault, and then of course when challenged as a misogynist, he said, well, I don't really do that. Although then we have women coming forward saying, yes, you have, yes, you do. So the idea here that what we have is a structure of power with a black president who Trump hates, whiteness and misogyny being represented, sadly, by Donald Trump. And what the question really is, I think, for us to wonder is how whiteness and misogyny are being reconfigured, redefined, remade, with women and people of color much more present in public spaces than they used to be. So in other words, the idea here again, the public-private divide that has been so much a part of the secrets, as more and more women of color, people of color have come into public spaces, including the President of the United States, there is new punishment for this process. I would argue sexual violence, and there was much discussion in India in 2013 that much of the problem of rape happened to relate to a changing economic globe where more and more women here were in public spaces. So the point here is power and politics is always a struggle. And the issue here is to understand in this moment that we are in an outright battle in the US between those who believe that misogyny and white privilege should remain the structure of power in the US, get rid of our immigrants, get rid of the Mexicans, the hatefulness of whiteness, and those of us with a myriad of beliefs, but who basically share an anti-racist and feminist perspective. The problem for many of us is that Hillary Clinton is an insufficient feminist. She has often worked on behalf of white privilege. She has often worked on behalf of militarism. She definitely works on behalf of Zionism and against the Palestinian struggle. There are many people, including me, in the United States who do not want to support Hillary Clinton, and yet we will vote against Donald Trump. It's pitiful. I have spent the better part of my mature life writing books and articles criticizing the politics of Hillary Clinton. And if you go on my website, you can get whatever level of analysis you'd like about that. For me to say that I am voting against Donald Trump and therefore have to vote for Hillary Clinton to ensure that he does not win, that is a major loss. And yet, at the same time, it speaks to the complexity of politics always, the intersectional commitments that we must figure out, and the coalitions that we must build. So what is happening in the US, and I think that we are supposed to have a huge women's demonstration against Trump in New York City. We'll see how big it gets. As I was saying to people earlier in the week, you know, I hope we can follow the women in Brazil, the women in Argentina, the women who have been out in the streets saying that we will not abide the violation of our bodies by you telling us that abortion will become illegal. Here we are hoping that women in the United States in coalitional form, whether they are Democratic, whether they are Republican, whether they are anti-racist enough or not, whether they are pro-Palestinian or not, that we will form a massive coalition to mobilize for an election where Donald Trump will lose. But again, the point here is politics is way bigger than any election or any electoral system, and that many of us are organizing to be ready that no matter who wins this election, that we have protest movements ready to move and go, demanding the rights of people of color in the US, an end to the criminalization of black people and the murder of blacks in our city streets, an end to the use of the carceral police state that the United States now has more people in prison than just about anywhere else. So the idea here that we are ready to mobilize across what? Across the intersectional issues of how power gets defined and is articulated, and not be reduced to the problem is Trump, because he is a problem, but he is a problem that is tied to a much bigger power structure. There is no way for him to have gotten to mobilize the way he has if our media power system was not interested in seeing him win. So the noise in the United States is deafening. We hear about Trump all the time. We hear almost nothing about Hillary's campaign. We're just told that she's doing better and better against him. But the issues and the question of really trying to mobilize a vote against Trump, that is not being done by some of the most powerful people in the United States. Okay? Now, it's really true. I work with so many fabulous women across the globe, and they always kind of make fun and say, Zillah, really, you know, the whole world should get to vote for the President of the United States. Whatever he does, so far he does, we all suffer. We should get to vote too. So I actually kind of agree. If that were the case, it would be a trounce. Why? And there may be many Modi supporters here. It'd be a trounce because why? For the very reason that Trump exists. The world, you know, white people are losing their majority status in the new global economy. It is a minority status. The idea that you keep that flipped and you allow it to seem as though white domination has any kind of sanity to it, that really has become more of an open secret as it just becomes clearer that any country, let alone globe, has multiple colors that need multiple notions of new democracy, not the old democracy, not the neoliberal or liberal democracy. So, as I've said earlier in the week as well, I've spent most of my life working on the idea that you can radicalize liberal democracy. I actually wrote a book about 30 years ago, and it was called The Radical Future of Liberal Feminism. And I said, you know, I'm a Marxist, so, I mean, I've never been a liberal feminist, you know, but a liberal feminist, it doesn't work because liberalism is rooted in patriarchy. So the minute you really become feminist, you got to get rid of your liberalism. You need something better. You need something more radical. Well, it hasn't quite worked out that way. Politics and power is smarter, and it's actually genius at finding ways to close the secrets. I'm betting on the fact that a few secrets are too open right now. And I really think that the secret about sexual violence may be the location of the greatest radical movement that we have ever seen. But again, if you think it's a singular site, you won't be able to work in a coalition with others that see it from the multiple places where they do. So there is a movement right now, one movement called 1 Billion Rising, and it is organizing for a global event on February 14th. It is using itself just to help build coalitions with all the groups of women on the ground throughout the world that suffer sexual violence, and particularly on the jobs that they do. So it is to organize the women workers of the world, which are millions. They are really the new proletariat. So the idea here is that by mobilizing through a consciousness of these sites, that we can move and build beyond and further. So I'm just going to drop that idea and throw out one other, which is some of the newest work I've been doing when people have asked me to give a name to the feminism that I am working with. And I am naming it now an abolitionist feminism, to abolish racism, to abolish sexism, to abolish classism. Maybe if I lived in India, I would be calling it an annihilist feminism for Ambedkar, who says basically we have to annihilate caste. we can't reform it. So the notion here of working for change, working in terms of the reforms that we have to work within. I mean, for me to vote for someone that I don't even want to, that's about as bad reformist as you can get. But I'm building that in the hopes of working towards a revolutionary critique that really will allow all people, no matter their gender, no matter their sex, no matter their race, no matter their class, no matter their caste, to really know and feel and love their humanity. So I love the fact that you gave me this chance in Hyderabad to kind of share with you some of the cryptic thoughts. Some of what I've shared with you is utterly new in terms of the trying to articulate out of this moment that is so chaotic. Because why? Because no power structure seems to be holding, yet people seem to be holding deep and hard with these power systems that are basically smothering our humanity. And I also thought it was interesting. We started with you standing for your national anthem. I am in a country right now where many of us go down on our knee. We do not stand for our national anthem because why? Because of the number of blacks who are being murdered in our streets by our police. And this was a movement led by actually several football players who refused at their football games to stand for the anthem, saying that not until the killing ends, okay? I told you I was brought up by communists. I never stood for a national anthem, all right? I was told nationalism is a dangerous thing, all right? That we all need to work carefully. We all need to work carefully and hard to find allegiances that allow everyone to breathe, okay? So Frantz Fanon in Algeria, leading and explaining the revolution, said, "We revolt because we cannot breathe." In the United States, when one of our black men was being killed by the police, he kept saying, they had him in a chokehold, and he said, "I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe." He said it 12 times and died. In the United States, we wear shirts saying, "I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe." Thank you for letting me breathe with you. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Capitalism is an economic system. How does it by itself predicate patriarchy? How does it by itself lead to patriarchy? It's an economic system like socialism is or communism is. How does capitalism by itself lead to patriarchy, misogyny, etc.?
Okay. So thank you so much for that question, because my answer is this. Capitalism is never by itself. It's never by itself. It is more than an economic system. It is implicitly a political system. When Adam Smith said, "Capitalism is wonderful. It's a race. It's the race of life. Anyone can run it and anyone can win it." And in my classes, I always asked my students, how many people win a race? So actually, it was one of my best ways of starting my section on capitalism. I had students who, of course, believed that capitalism, it's normal, it's natural, and it's an economic system. But it is powered by what? The stealing of labor, and also the stealing of reproductive labor. And that is simultaneous and always. So as long as you've had capitalism, you've had patriarchy. So, you know, the idea here again is not that this is going to be resolved tonight, although wouldn't that be fun, okay? But the idea here of really what is the relationship of capitalism, I mean, you have to become some kind of a feminist in order to think that capitalism does not stand by itself, because otherwise the entire political spectrum, okay, liberals, neoliberals, actually fascists, progressives, Marxists, leftists, they all do capitalism. All right? Piketty, have any of you read his book called Capital? Okay? It was just 2 years ago said to be the new brilliance. The man does capital, the accumulation of wealth, not one mention of chattel slavery, not one mention of domestic labor or sexual division of labor. So I wrote a critique of Piketty. Excuse me, capital is not capital. You know the answer.
You have thoughts on an alternate system which would propel a reduction of poverty and improvement of standards of living?
Yes. Now, can I make it happen? No. Am I completely committed to a system that is not rooted in the stealing of people's labor, that is not rooted in the accumulation of unequal, unfair wealth? Yeah, I think a lot of us could do better than that. Okay? So the point here of the idea now, of course, I've worked on this long enough to know that many people believe that capitalism is just the natural and inevitable outgrowth of human nature. There's no human nature. There is only the nature that gets defined by the systems that exist. There is no human nature. We are. The systems of power are the definition of what is needed. So again, these are really ultimately divisive issues. What more divisive could you be than to say that there is no human nature? That we are a product of the power systems and the struggles that we emanate from. But just think about it. The power systems are so oppressive, and so many of us are still good. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Madam, we're really enlightened by our lecture. What I want to say is, no matter what despotic rule is, or racist rule is, or imperialistic rule is, or liberalism, or for that matter, anything, it is humanitarianism which must be the mainstay of politics. That's what we must believe in, and we must judge, by that parameter, and that's what we would. And I'm glad you mentioned the gender bias also, which is very much prevalent and which is working against the women as such in society. But your critical appraisal of the speech, mentioning this is really worth hearing, and it's really remarkable, and the critical appraisal does full justice to this humanitarian approach in politics and life.
Mr. Madhava.
Ma'am, you mentioned the barriers for revolution are patriotism, capitalism, racism, and feminism. You have not mentioned about religion. I thought this is a greater enemy of revolution than all the three.
Religion.
Yeah.
Religion,
Yes. Well,
as Marx said, is the opium. It is the opium that is preventing people from revolting.
Well, I do think that there are horrible religious conflicts. Of course, Hyderabad knows that all too well. Although I do think that the question of exactly how we name and think about religion is at issue here. So to me, during the Bosnian War, it was said to be an ethnic religious conflict, whereas on the whole, what you saw in Bosnia was power systems using ethnic identities and using sexual conflict to maintain and support war and militarism. Now, of course, in this particular moment with ISIL, is the notion of Islamic terrorism. Clearly, these are issues that need to be dealt with and should be part of the coalition that I have asked you to start to think about. But we can't think about it in terms of the traditional formulation of religious struggle. We need to put religion inside and alongside the systems of power and their needs. So do I think that the crisis of traditional patriarchy at this particular moment for global capitalism is at the root of so much of the Islamic terrorism, particularly towards female bodies? I absolutely do. I don't think that we can really come to terms with the present moment without understanding the way that women's bodies are being bartered in the crisis of patriarchy. Now, what I mean by that, just very briefly, is the fact that capitalism is such a rapacious system. It is so greedy. I mean, really, maybe if they could just do with 5% of the people rather than just 1%, maybe people wouldn't be so angry, but no, we got 1% to the 99% of the rest of us. So the point here is that capitalism has never existed without its system of traditional patriarchy. As it has torn the traditional family asunder with the issues of labor and bringing women more and more into public exploitation, both sexual and economic, patriarchy cannot do the job that it used to do for capitalism. Enter Islamic terrorism and the use of it by the right wing in many countries, including the United States. So again, my point, I would not be arrogant enough to say I know all the problems and I know all the answers. But what I am saying is I don't think we are thinking about the problems contextually enough in this moment as part of a complicated political system. And that the political system here means power. Political is the relations of power, where they are located and who fights to keep them, and who fights to be able to use them to punish. So the idea here that religion is used in this, absolutely. That millions of people have died in those struggles, absolutely. My thought is, we haven't done a very good job of figuring this out. Let's try it a little differently. Let's stop thinking that these are sites that are not interconnected with each other. And then, of course, my biggest hope, I so appreciate the statement of the need for humanitarianism. But what I'm really hoping is that each one of you will become an anti-racist feminist. And what I mean by that is that finally, if we specify those needs, we might finally get to a real humanitarianism. We have used language that assumes that everyone is included, when so many of us have been excluded. So I'm saying, let's try it different this time. Let's specify the systems that are interconnected and need changing. Let's specify them, and let's see if that gets us closer to a new revolutionary humanity. So if I could just say one word about Black Lives Matter. that movement in the United States when they said Black Lives Matter. I mean, on one level, that is just sad, right? That you have to say that. But the response by the right wing, and particularly Trump supporters, were, what do you mean Black Lives Matter? All lives matter. And the Black Lives Matter activists say, that's right. And until Black Lives Matter, all lives can't matter. Okay? So I'm for us all becoming a little more specific and particular in the coalition that we build, in the hopes of really starting to move towards what? Something honest and real. You know? It's been hundreds of years that we've been doing this argument. This group has been excluded, let's include. This group's been excluded, let's include. To the point in my country, we even elected a black president. We're probably going to elect a white woman. The point is that the intersectional system of power is corrupt. That is what we need to change. And the only way we might have a chance of changing it is that we just make sure that we don't get a leader that makes it impossible, that just puts his foot on all of our necks quite too soon. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. My question is just about what you were talking about, the US presidential elections. You said that you would vote for Hillary Clinton just so that you vote against Trump. My question is, what did you think about Bernie Sanders, who is like you, a socialist? And as a feminist, would you have preferred that it was Bernie Sanders versus Trump now?
Yeah. Well, I think if it was Bernie Sanders would win, and he'd win
Kalpana.
huge and big. And that the Democratic Party really, really made a mistake when they were so power hungry and also power committed that they went with Hillary Clinton when it was already clear she was a questionable candidate for a whole series of reasons. I supported Bernie Sanders. I was a advisor to the Women for Bernie group, and they were 3 million strong. They were completely committed to having Bernie Sanders become the next president. Many of them are ready to do whatever has to happen with whoever gets elected, you know, in November. My own feeling and the work I did in the Bernie Sanders campaign, along with a group of black women, was to try to get Bernie Sanders to say and to recognize more that socialism is a patriarchal and racist system, and therefore socialism was not enough of an answer, okay? So the point holds here. I mean, it really was. I supported Bernie Sanders, but critically. I felt as though he had a terrible feminist platform and that he absolutely did not have enough of an anti-racist one either. He did actually, over time, develop a better anti-racist one. He never did too well on a feminist one.
Kalpana at the rear.
Hi, Zillah. I actually wanted to make a very brief comment on the point that Mr. Madhav Rao raised about religion.
Yes?
Because I think that when we are, particularly in this context, when we're talking about religion, it's not necessarily about religious conflagrations or even just Islamic terrorism. That isn't really the biggest threat in this part of the world. What is the biggest threat is the micro practices of violence and discrimination that are embedded in religious ideology, particularly if you look at something like the caste system. And the response has not always been a complete rejection of religion or a turn to atheism. That has been one of the responses. But there have been a host of other responses as well. For instance, either a turn to Buddhism or a turn to bhakti or an estual of violence in very, very many forms. And I think that that space of resistance has also had a very strong feminist presence that did not necessarily name itself as feminist. And I think that in thinking about coalitions, we might want to complicate the question of religion beyond looking at these large, violent, global episodes of terrorism of whatever variety.
Well, just thank you so much for that.
Young lady there.
Hi.
Hello.
Considering that you were talking about coalition between two groups, assuming there are two groups, I was actually a little curious about imagining the power within that coalition itself, considering that, okay, so you said white people and people of color versus you said upper caste people and Dalits, and you know the importance of such a coalition. So what happens to power there? So, like, you talked about how even within Black Lives Matter, you said that they actually asserted that unless Black Lives Matter, all lives don't matter. So that complication of power within this coalition is what I wanted to ask about. Like, how do you understand this coalition then? Or is coalition a different word? Like, what does that mean then?
Well, power struggles always exist in any form of politics, and definitely in coalition. And it does mean that there has to be a renegotiation and a reformation of the different privileges that have existed. So clearly, white privilege has to not be exercised in the coalition. And there is politics that has to happen to make sure that that is so. In the same way as a kind of masculinity cannot define and quiet gay and trans activists or feminist individuals. Have I been in groups where those differences of power exist? And is it possible to work together? Absolutely, because the coalition exists for the purpose of changing those systems of power. Is it always easy? Absolutely not. Does it require complete honesty and risk of the individuals involved? Absolutely. It's no place for kind of liberal friendliness. It is a place to really confront and challenge and grow together. And it can happen. It does happen. It needs to happen more.
Yeah, this young lady.
Ma'am, if we get into the fixing of terrorism, racism, and all these negative things, the most imperative thing at the moment is to change the mindset, basically to treat the people, to treat the whole human race psychologically. So why don't we get all the reformists, all the social activists, and all the psychiatrists also all together and get an elementary subject in education system, like as religiously we study maths, English, and everything. Why don't we study a subject like that, created by all you people like reformists, activists, and all psychiatrists, and we get a basic subject in education system? Why we not after that thing? Like, see what past has been, and we can't change the past, but why we don't prepare our future? Why we don't treat people psychologically, basically? That's my question.
Why don't we reform the education system? Why don't we look forward to improve?
Why would psychologically change the mindset of the future generation?
Well, absolutely. The way that we think matters. That's really on some level what we're doing here, what all of these meetings that you have, to think and talk and wonder and explore. The only thing that I think also has to happen is that it's not enough to change people's minds, because you don't fully get an opportunity to do that without really doing activist work that begins to change the very processes that really define the way that people think. The education system absolutely would be a fabulous place to locate new ideas, but the education system is part of the system of power. So that's not one and the same to say that education systems are only in the interest of powerful people, but the structuring of them really limits how much exploration can happen. So the point here is that in any focus on full change, the education system is absolutely part of that structural change that must be front and center. So I totally agree.
Hi, Zillah. You have talked about misogyny at a good length, but my question here is, after the comments of Trump surfaced about misogynistic, all that misogynistic comments, I've seen plenty of groups from women, especially women groups, coming up in support of Trump in USA, and saying that, and there have been comments saying that that is how a real man behaves. So how is US braced for such a kind of mindset coming from the women supporting Trump after such comments?
Well, that question is so important because it really does speak to the fact that, nothing is natural. So you can have a female body and not be a feminist. So the idea that there are women who are supporting Trump, they are supporting Trump for very similar political reasons that I've talked about. They're racist. They really do support a traditional family structure, many of them who are part of that. They have resentments and angers and feelings of dislocation and also poverty. These are not people to hate, but they are people to struggle to try to change. But I don't find it surprising that women support Trump, because this is, again, as I said, an issue of politics and what you believe in. Just as I love the men who are feminist, who struggle against misogyny daily.
That lady there. Yeah. Put it on.
Yeah, you mentioned that capitalism in general is not only an economic system but also a social system with a lot of imbalances. Can you elaborate a little more on what your alternative is to this capitalistic system, and how is it less patriarchal?
Well, the second part is the easiest part. It's less patriarchal, and there would be no sexual division of labor. Women would have full control of their bodies. The issue of sexual violence would be dealt with not necessarily punitively, but creatively and revolutionarily. That the idea that gender is not the source of one's power, and that there is no determination by sexuality itself. The issue, it's easy for me to say what I believe. I think that economic systems should be egalitarian. I do not believe that the way that we come to feel good about ourselves is by differentiating ourselves from others, but rather by sharing community with others. So I want an economic system that does not put us in competition with each other, but puts us in cooperation with meeting the needs of everyone in our community. Do I think that that is possible? I do. Do I think that there might be difficult transitional periods? Most probably. Do I think we have nothing to lose at this moment? I do.
Hi, Zillah.
Hi.
So, as a Bernie Sanders supporter, I could clearly see your frustration at having to vote now for Hillary. And you've called her, among other things, you've called her an incomplete feminist. So why is that? Is it because she just stood silent when her husband was, as president, went on a rampage, even otherwise? Is that so? And do you think Sanders would have been, is more of a feminist than Hillary, between the two of them?
Yeah, well, that's such an interesting question, and I might change my mind tomorrow, but I would say that Bernie Sanders, I think he could be a better feminist because he's a socialist, and she can't be a better feminist because she is a capitalist who has really stood not with the people, even though right now, in order to win, she is saying that she is not a protector of the banks and not a protector of the rich. But she has become rich, and she is a rich person who wants to protect the system for international banking and international corporations, you know, in terms of trade policy, etc. When going with that, her very powerful statement that people always speak about is that when she ran in 2008, that they put many cracks in the ceiling, and that she wants to break the ceiling for women. And what I have always argued against her in the last 8 years is, I'm not looking at the ceiling. Most women are not looking to break the ceiling, okay, the upper reaches. We just want to get most of us across the globe out of the basement, okay? So the point here is, I'm for most women. You know, when she says, how can she be a feminist and do what has been done in Afghanistan and Iraq? You know, she actually promised some of the Afghan women leaders that there would be, you know, that certain changes would absolutely happen if they would only come to the table. They went to the table, none of those changes have happened. Many Afghan women, I mean, there's a conflict there as well, but many Afghan feminists say that they were much better off before the United States came to save them. So again, the other major issue that I have had with Hillary Clinton was in fighting myself against the Iraq intervention and war and the Afghan wars. And she, along with many of the women in the structures of power, said that we needed to get involved in Afghanistan to save Afghan women from the Taliban. There were those of us feminists, anti-militarist feminists in the US who said, do not wrap US bombs in women's rights discourse. Do not do that. You are not allowed to use our name for war. She has done that repeatedly. When she becomes president, and I think she probably will, she will do it again. We are hoping that women across the globe will stand against the new feminism, what we call the neoliberal feminism of war. And those of us, particularly white women in the United States, hate the fact that it will be a white woman who will lead empire. We would prefer it not to be. Okay? So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell.
That young man there.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the session. And let me ask you, can you justify whether the capitalism is better than socialism or socialism is better than capitalism? So, well, actually, the faster growth is possible only with the capitalism. And why most of the Americans are rejecting Donald Trump, as he is promising that he is make US as one more time as a superpower of economics. So, can you justify whether which is better? And politicians prefer that. They prefer the system which the power is in their hands of economics. So they prefer the system. Can you justify whether capitalism is better than socialism or socialism better than system? Thank you.
Well, all I can say is I hate the fact that now in the United States we have homeless people, that I have to walk down the street and deal with that in some way. If you think capitalism is a system that is better, that is something that I can't change your mind about. For me, poverty and the homeless and the level of sadness, aloneness, and fear that people live with daily because they do not have what they need in terms of food, shelter, and clothing, when there are just millions of people right now who are needing food stamps in the United States and can't even get them, then it seems to me, you know, there's just not a whole lot more that one can say about why capitalism doesn't work. It works for the few. No one has ever said it doesn't. It just doesn't work for enough people. It's not fair. It's ugly. I want it to end.
Hello.
Hi.
You said you wish to see Hillary Clinton as a president. Hillary Clinton as a president. You wish to see Hillary Clinton as a president rather than Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So, whichever party comes into power, whoever becomes president, unless there is a transformation in the society, how can you expect that you can see this kind of changes, whatever your racial or violence? How can you justify that? Unless there is transformation in the society or sensitization
I think she got
in the
it.
society.
She got it. She'll reply.
How can you see that radical changes will come when Hillary Clinton becomes the president?
Yes. I meant to say that, of course,
Give it to that lady.
many of us, including me, do not expect Hillary Clinton to really put in place the policies that we care about. But we do believe that we'll have a better starting point for those policies than if Donald Trump is elected. So it is the lesser of two evils position. There are people in the US, many progressives. We are not in a good place. Many progressives will not vote for Hillary Clinton. They say they do not want Trump to win, but they will not vote for her, and they become just incredibly angry with the argument that I have put forward. Okay? So there is huge conflict over what to do in this particular moment. And I would not want to cover
Would
that
that lead
over.
to Trump winning?
I think the only way that Donald Trump can win is if the turnout is really low. If the turnout is low, he'll win because his group is really mobilized and they will get out and vote. But I think that, and of course, this is for a different day to talk about, but I think that so much of the exposing of Trump and therefore the anger towards Trump has worked enormously in favor of Hillary Clinton because now Hillary Clinton has my vote. So you should know I'm not happy about this, and maybe I've really, been totally taken advantage of here, but I don't feel that I can risk. The people of color that I work with are horrified at the idea if Trump wins. I mean, he says, vote for me and we'll do stop and frisk again. That was found unconstitutional in the United States as victimizing people of color. They say if he gets elected, stop and frisk starts again. Zillah, I can't live in this country. I won't be able to go out of my house. So my point here, though, is that there was not a lot of support for Hillary Clinton. The support against Trump will probably get her elected. So maybe we will have a very problematic new analysis come a month from now.
I'll ask one question. I'll take the privilege of a second question. This huge support for Trump, almost 40% of the American population seems to be supporting him. What does it tell us about that society?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not 40% of our population. I would just stay here if it were, okay? It's 40% of the voting population, and we barely vote. We're around at 52%. So like when Ronald Reagan was said to have a landslide, he won 26% of the vote in the United States for his landslide. So the point here is, in terms of support for Donald Trump racism and misogyny, in terms of the research I've done over the years, I'd say that he probably has the support, serious support of that kind, between 14 and 18%, which is already a lot.
Large enough, yeah.
It's large enough and it's frightening enough. And they're not going away. If Trump loses, they're ready. They have their Confederate flags out. They have their guns, and they got a lot of guns. A lot.
Hi.
My question is, what does it tell us about the society?
Well, I think that's pretty self-evident, no? That we have an ugly part of our society that is still rooted in chattel slavery and racism and a hatred towards women, and that they are a very mobilized part of our country, maybe 20% worth. You know, that's frightening.
That lady there.
Right here.
We'll take 3 more questions, Zillah.
Okay.
Since we're speaking about building coalitions for change, my question is, what kind of a distinction do you see between working within existing systems of power for change and between working against systems of power? Do you see a distinction? And perhaps on a related note, do you see a difference between calling yourself an abolitionist feminist versus an nihilist feminist?
So what's I couldn't quite get the last part.
Perhaps on a related note to
Yeah.
my initial question, do you see a distinction between calling yourself an abolitionist feminist versus an nihilist feminist?
No, I mean, I just was giving that a cultural distinction here. You know, an abolitionist feminist in the U.S. and a nihilist feminist here, that I am drawing some parallels between Dalit and caste problems and the problems of racial hatred in the United States. Not that they are the same at all, but they do have some similarities. And I do believe that the dichotomy between reform and revolution is a problematic one. That I myself in work have seen that sometimes as you are doing reformist work, meaning inside, that as you do that, people actually come to understand why that's not enough and why a more revolutionary or radical position is necessary. So I think that to say either or is problematic. The other thing is that I think there is a lot of misunderstanding about the meaning of revolution, as though it's a moment, that it's a thing, that it happens, as opposed to that it's a process, and that you can begin a revolution that then has revolutionary moments in it. I'm hoping that we have a revolutionary moment in the United States in a couple of weeks. So I'll let you know.
Hello, Zillah.
Where are you? I can't.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I have a slightly unrelated question. It's completely, totally related to the question at hand, but then this is from a different angle.
Sure.
I mean, you have been a distinguished scholar in residence at your esteemed institution, and you've been an enabler, a teacher, a scholar for so many years. And what do you think about this particular phenomenon, which is, I think, very, very recent? In the last 5 or 10 years, we have news coming in from the United Kingdom and from the United States and across from Europe as well, that the governments do not take nicely to the soft subjects, which is basically students from humanities, I mean humanities and other related stuff, so basically the liberal arts as such. And there is this very, synchronized movement across governments to shut down the soft subjects, which means the subjects that enable you to think and formulate your opinion as a human being. And when we think about the classroom as a question, we have one question about the classroom from her. And also this is very, for me this is related to the first question asked by, about capitalism being merely an economic system as well. And the classroom being the space where we first know who we are, where we have our own formulations about the world, where we find our allies, and where we realize where we are going wrong as a generation and as an individual. And what do you think about this recent phenomenon where, increasingly the humanities, as a system of knowledge the government is being hostile about it, the universities are being hostile about it, the funding is being cut dry, the students are left in a lurch. And even in India, it's the same, because we have the private universities which focus on really exotic subjects which enable you to become a global citizen, whereas students from national university, the state universities, state-funded universities, are often, let's say, victims
I think the point is made.
Yeah, the standardized, unimaginative subject. So I would like to know your thoughts on this. What do you see, and how do you think this is connected to the larger issues at hand, wherein the capitalism as a system is making us products instead of being able to think and formulate opinions?
Well, just totally, I mean, it's a totally strategic move. You need to fight like hell to keep these spaces open. They are the only spaces that will really allow the continued mobilization and a demand to radicalize institutions of learning and the academy. In the U.S. right now, our universities are becoming much more conservative. Most professors no longer have a job like I had, where I had tenure and I had promotion, etc. People get paid by the course. They live on poverty wages. They have yearly contracts. They are the new proletariat. I just sent an international note in support of what are called adjunct professors at my university who are fighting for a living wage tomorrow with a picket line outside the school. So the idea here is that this is a struggle. Most of the adjunct workers, meaning that you just have a yearly contract, most of them are women and people of color. So the idea here, and with that, the idea that is a site of struggle, though, that needs to build coalition with the larger forces as well, so that education is not an individual site, but becomes one of the sites of a renewed system of power. So, and I do want to say, though, that I want you to know that my life has been a constant struggle in the academy. Political science wanted nothing to do with me in terms of the work I did. Why? Because political science was to study what? Capitalism and the public sphere. And what did I study? Family, gender, sexual division of labor, reproductive rights. And I dared them. You don't want to give me tenure because of what I do? I dare you. So the point is that I didn't care if they didn't give me tenure. So what I'm saying is you must risk it, They don't know what to do with you when you do. You get fearful, they know.
Hello, ma'am. Like you said that capitalism over a period of time has adopted the various power structures. So when we align people for coalition against individual power structures, they get associated idealistically with a fight against one power structure. And over a period of time, the whole revolutionary movement has a tendency to deviate itself. So what should be the conscious effort to again realign them, or to be on the constant path of whole fight against capitalism?
So I'm not quite sure. Did you? I didn't quite catch the idealism and the problem that you saw. Did the rest of you? I didn't get. Yeah.
So that time they get along with the revolutionary movement, but over a period of time they don't get gelled with the whole revolutionary movement against capitalism. So the movement has a tendency to deviate itself. What should be the
Well, that is a political struggle, to constantly really reassess and redefine what those elements are. So the point here is that it is interesting in my own work. I found it much easier to get liberal feminists to become socialists than I found it to get male Marxists to become feminists. Okay? And it was, I mean, the work I did early on in my work was always arguing with Marxists to become feminists. And then in the early 1970s, I was asked to address a huge group in the government who were liberal feminists, why they needed to be more radical. And actually Bella Abzug, who was a well-known liberal feminist, quite iconic, she wore these big hats, etc. She called me and she asked me if I would do that. And I said, well, you know, I know how to talk to Marxists about why they need to be feminists, but I don't actually know how to talk to liberals about how they need to be socialist at all. And so she said, well, will you try? So I did. And I still remember the breaking point for me that said, okay, I can do this. So my first line when I got there was, okay, women say they want to be equal to men. Okay, so I want to know, which men do you want to be equal to? Pretty good, don't you think? So the idea was that brought in the question of class inequality, you know, the silences that exist in our discourses, and they were often running, you know. So it was really interesting. I mean, in my own political work, I have had these unexpected moments where people move in directions that you never could imagine.